Welcome to the 3BN YouTube channel. Happy New Year because this is the first recording we're having for the new year. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2025. In the past year, 2024, we started a book, The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives, and that's what we're still on. If this is your first time of coming across our channel, welcome. Please do well to subscribe so you can always get notifications when we make a new episode and upload. And also share, like, comment. We always like to hear from you and we like to see those likes come in. So let's continue with the book, The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives. We are in chapter 9 and it is titled Iya Tope. 9 years ago, I came home from the farm to find Baba Segi sitting in my father's hut. I was 23 years old, I remember. It was later in the year that my older brother declared that I was ripe for marriage. My mother did not tell him to mind his mouth. Instead, without raising her face from the heap of melon seeds, she added, "Truth be told, she's bordering on decay." I cannot forget that day. Not because their words did not cause me sorrow, but because I remember thinking how unjust it was that the gods had blessed them with such wondrous eyes. How was it that they could see the womanhood that I, on whose body was plastered, could not? Within me, I was certain I was still a child. I felt like a child and enjoyed childish pleasures like pursuing ants as they carried away sugar lumps and scratching hardened scabs from the edge of my old bones. I even conversed with friends that only I could see. My father was from a long line of cassava farmers who learned to hoe cassava mounds before the age of 3 and hacked the brown nuggets from the soil until the day they too were planted in fertile land. Unlike most villages, ours did not have a school or electricity. The nearest school was 6 miles down the expressway. Elders scowled at the more eager pupils. The time it took to walk to school and back could be better spent, they said. By the time hair sprouted from the armpits, most children had their own cassava stalls on the edge of the highway. As for electricity, we didn't send gifts to the local government chief like other villages. We were simple people. What the ground didn't give, we didn't yearn for. Most people looked forward to the planting season, but I hated it. I detested the hoeing and wished away the heavy watering cans. So when it was time for planting, I complained of a backache. I lay groaning on my mat while my brothers and sisters unfastened their hoes from the nails that jutted out of the hut hall. As I rolled from side to side clutching my back, I dreamed of the day weeds would cluster around cassava shoots. Weeding, I loved. I loved the feel of the small leaves, the strength of the stems. I loved shaking the soil from the roots and laying them in a row. Sometimes I liked to hug them to my imaginary friends. Good fresh spinach, buy your fresh spinach. My father called me one day and asked me when exactly I planned to finish weeding the family vegetable patch. Soon, Baba. And when I finished, I would start again, I replied. Your age mates are planting, grinding, drying and selling, but you creep around the farm, sweating over weeds until your shadow lengthens. I am thorough, Baba. With weeding, you must be thorough. My daughter, men want women who can work beside them on the farm, not behind them. Your younger sister has suitors who would climb 1,000 trees to win her hand. Are you not concerned that no one has turned their mouths to talk of marrying you? Maybe the men you speak of have not seen how thoroughly I can read. Have you not heard the words I have spoken? He let out a long breath and seized his walking stick. Without another glance in my direction, he drew lines on the earthen floor, a cluster of strokes, and then, about a yard apart, one stroke standing all by itself. In those days, it was common for wealthy men who owned garri factories in Ibadan to dazzle village farmers with their big cars and big money talk. They leased farmland and paid the villagers to tend the crops that grew on it. Their goal was to reap the yield from crops that they had never nurtured. My brother said that was the way of the rich. The year before, my father had been greatly pleased when he waved goodbye to 2 trucks full of hefty cassava tubers. He received more money than he had ever seen, and he kept the wad of crisp notes in his trouser pockets for days, smiling every time his knuckles bruised or brushed against them. Baba Segi had returned for another prosperous harvest the following year, but he was met by fidgety fingers and eyes that darted downward, sideways, then upwards to the gods. My father was afraid, so he gave Baba Segi the news in full view of the entire village. Sitting on a bench next to my father, Baba Segi looked like an insatiable demon. His skin was oily and supple, whereas my father's was flaky and dry, like orobo shells. Baba Shegi's shiny face didn't show any reaction to the news, but his toes flapped in leather slippers like the ears of a dog. Then, quite unexpectedly, he looked around and seized a boy by the arm. "Take me to the toilet," he begged. Every eye watched Baba Segi as he barged through the door of the unroofed pit latrine. We heard every rumble, every goggle, every fart, and every splutter. When Baba Segi emerged, he reoccupied the space on the bench and told the dumbstruck villagers that everything happened for a reason and that he was thinking of a new business anyway. He added that the ways of the gods were mysterious. The truth was that the rains had punished the village of Borode by refusing to fall, and the sun had dealt mercilessly with the cassava shoots. Instead of standing high and cooling the soil with their broad green leaves, they stooped and crawled until they were toasted like bristles. The ground hardened and split from the heat, forcing anxious villagers to journey to the forest in search of water to moisten the soil. Even my father, with his bent back, followed the tray of water fetchers. He got on his knees and scooped sand until his fingers touched water. I was frustrated too. No water meant no weed. Since the sun denied me my joy that year, I hid under the pile of mats at home, as far away from its rot as possible. It was only when I heard the wind carrying voices home from the forest path that I abandoned my hiding place to help them ease calabashes off their heads. My father's wife sneered at my helpfulness, and my mother hid her face behind her wrapper. On the day Baba Segi was to cut off his bad harvest, my father sat on a stool outside his hut and stared at the miserable baskets, 6 in number. His legs were stretched out in front of him and his chin rested on his walking stick. When I surfaced from my mother's hut to slice okra, I greeted him. He didn't respond but followed me with his eyes. He made me feel so self-conscious that I took my okra back into my mother's hut. Soon afterward, Baba Shegi's pickup appeared at the end of the dusty road. My father shouted my name and instructed me to turn out a large mold of amala to be accompanied by a efo made from the freshest spinach leaves I could find. My father didn't wait for Baba Shegi's feet to touch the ground. He scooped him out of the pickup and into the darkness of his hut. It did not take me any time to prepare the meal, so when I finished, I joined my mother and her co-wives in the shade of palm fronds. My siblings sat there too, slapping off gnats that perched on their bare shoulders. I found it strange that they were being so quiet. Sitting in the middle of this strange, heavy silence, I wondered whether I should seize the opportunity to say something. It didn't look like they would cut me short then take over my voice the way they usually did. Just when the sun began its journey into the treetops, my father summoned me. I was surprised to find him and Baba Segi sitting so close together, their arms touching as they drank the bottle of schnapps that was normally only sipped at weddings and funerals. My father told me to bring the food in and I returned with a wide tray, but as I stooped at the door, the men stopped talking. Baba Segi inspected me as I placed the plates on a low stool and fetched cool water from the earthen pot. He examined my face as I poured it into 2 plastic cups. My father watched him watching me. "She's not a great beauty," I heard my father saying as I closed the door. His discretion had dwindled with the schnapps, but she's as strong as 3 donkeys and thorough too. She loses in wit, she gains in meticulousness. This is a great virtue in a wife. I have 3 wives, so I speak from experience. Even a child would have worked out why my father was extolling qualities that had previously vexed him. I was compensation for the failed crops. I was just like tubers of cassava in the basket. Maybe something even less, something strange. a tuba with eyes, a nose, arms, and 2 legs. Without fanfare or elaborate farewells, I packed my bags. I didn't weep for my mother or my father, or even my siblings. It was the weeds I didn't get a chance to uproot that year that bothered me. I should have known something unusual would happen that year. The drought did something to my ears. Whenever I spoke to my spirit friends, their words were muffled, as if spoken from a plot on a faraway land. Taju drew my belongings in the back, 2 plastic bags and 2 tubers of yam. I sat between the 2 men in the pickup and stared ahead at roads I had never traveled before. So this was Ibadan, the big city where all our second-hand clothes enjoyed their first outings, the place where cars honked, engines roared, and bus conductors screamed. I covered my ears. Everything was urgent, most unlike the leisurely place at which things bubbled along in the village. In the middle of all this noise, Baba Segi asked me if I was happy about being his wife. I couldn't utter a single word. I wanted to say something. I should have said something, but I couldn't. It has always been hard for me to speak my feelings. Even now, when I try to say things, my mouth opens and closes like a fish waiting for a hook. I choke on my words. I swallow them. I didn't have to worry about this in the village because my family could read my mind. Just before I left, I went to my father's hut and stood by the door. I didn't need to say anything, the same way he didn't need to look at me. I have made my decision and it is final, he said. When we arrived at Baba Shegi's house, he pushed me toward Iya Shegi and warned me that I should show her great respect. He said I should be grateful that I was in such good hands. Iya Shegi smiled, but I could see her chest stomping beneath her buba. Her neck had a scarf of skin wrapped around it. She squinted at the lacy dress my mother told me to wear for the journey. It was more suited to a 15-year-old, but I liked the way it nestled and rustled when I walked. Her eyes swept across the tiny fruits on my chest, which had never been groped or suckled. If not for fists drawn like daggers at her sides, it would have been impossible to tell what she was hiding behind the creased eyes and set smile. She was not happy to see me. By the time my husband finished the introductions, the lamps in her eyes were dead. "Come to my room," she said. "I have good soap that you can wash yourself with. I would also give you clothes to wear. Your rags cannot stay in this house." All the time her lips moved, her dead eyes were fixed on Baba Segi so he wouldn't miss a word. Then, slinging her son onto her hip, she admonished me for my silence. "You're a wife now, not a child. Say thank you to your husband and follow me." Several months after, she knocked on my door in the middle of the night. She must have crawled out from under Baba Segi because back then it was just the 2 of us. She had Baba Segi 4 times a week and I had him thrice. I would have happily given up my nights as well. There were weeks I ached so much I couldn't sit. "Get pregnant quickly or he will soon start to force feed you bitter concoctions from medicine men until your belly rumbles in your sleep," she said. For many weeks, her words kept me awake at night. Then, one day, as she had predicted, Baba Shegi asked me what was wrong with my womb. "If your father has sold me a rotten fruit, it will be returned to him." Oh. His words bothered me even more than Iya Shegi's. I didn't want to go back to the village in Baba Shegi's house. I did not have to plant and harvest cassava. Apart from the daily chores Iya Shegi allotted me, all I did was plait and play with Shegi's hair. Her hair was yet black, every strand stubborn and strong. Combing it was like weeding. It took me time and nimble fingers, but the results were beautiful. I will not mention the name of the man I met because I am ashamed. All I'll say is that he was the meat seller Iya Shegi sent me to every Wednesday. Although his meat was always tasty, I still asked him whether the cow that was opened up on the table was killed on the day. He replied that his meat was always fresh and scraped some orange marrow into his mouth to prove it. He smiled. His teeth were not white, but they looked like they could crack many bones. His tongue was pink. His eyebrows met above his nose. He was from Iwo. I could tell from the incisions that darkened his cheeks. He nodded and cut 5,000 naira worth of meat into small cubes, all the time listening to another butcher's anecdote with one ear. It was not until I untied my wrapper that I realized the money wasn't where I noted it. What grown woman throws away money her father does not have like that? I felt like a child again. For a while, he watched me scramble and search the muddy ground. Then, I think when he was sure I was not pretending, he asked me to stop troubling myself. Markets are dangerous places, and women were often disgraced for such misdeeds, so I was lucky. I offered to leave the meat and return later with money, but he insisted that I take it with me. He said he would be at his stall until 4 o'clock. I gathered all the money Baba Segi had given me over the months and quickly explained what had happened to Iya Shegi. Make sure something worthwhile comes out of all this foolishness, she murmured. The days are passing quickly and your village calls you. She emptied the diced beef into the kitchen sink and waved me away. I carried Shegi's hair for a few seconds and left. He was already scraping his table down with a knife when I got there. I did not doubt for a minute that he would come, he said. I let him see that I had brought more than I owed and pressed the money into his hand. I held it there and took his eyes into mine. At first, he looked surprised, but then he closed his fingers around the money and told me to sit and wait for him to finish his cleaning. My heart rejoiced. So there were other people on this earth who could tell what was on my mind. He led me to his home and took me. I will never forget that day or any other day that I spent with him. He made my body sing. He made me howl like he bent me over. He made me whimper when he sat me on his belly. And when he took me standing up, it was as if there was a frog inside me puffing out his throat, blowing, blowing, blowing until whoosh. All the warm air escaped through my limbs. Even when my belly was rounded, I continued to go to him. I couldn't help myself. There was something he gave me that I wanted constantly, endlessly. 3 days after I gave birth to my first daughter, I waited for Baba Segi to leave for his new building materials store. As soon as Taji drove him away, I tied the infant on my back and sat on a boulder outside the meat seller's home. When he arrived, he asked me if the child was a boy or a girl. I completely forgot that I even carried a child on my back. Please do not blame me. It was eagerness. I had not been with him for a week. By the time he had hung up all his tools, I removed the baby and my clothes and laid them down in a neat pile on the floor. Tope was a good baby. She did not cry. He asked me if I had brought him some money. I wondered if he lay with me for the money alone. For 3 years, that was how I lived. 3 days of pummeling from Baba Segi and a day of healing from the meat seller. Those afternoons were what life itself, and it was not until one morning, after I had given birth to Mutun, my third daughter, that I realized how little of life remained outside those afternoons. Yashegi burst into my room, her brow folded with anger, the skin around her throat rippling. "Can you not hear the infant crying?" she shouted. "Oh!" My thoughts were far away. I got up to lift the child out of her cot. Her small eyes were glazed from crying. I placed my nipple into her mouth. As I looked around for my other children, Nyashagi's eyes followed mine. Afolake was sitting in the corner, pushing what was leaking out of her nappy into Tope's nostrils. Tope was fast asleep. All her clothes were inside out. "Too far away!" Nyashagi pinched her nose and perched on the edge of the bed. "Last week, our husband asked me if you were sick. He said there was a bad smell in your room." She looked around suspiciously as if something catching would jump out of the words. "I will not let you destroy this home with your excesses. You have allowed the concubine to become the husband. I have not known anyone to worship a pernice the way you do." She stopped to take a long breath. "Listen carefully to what I have to say, because if I'm forced to say it again, it will be wedged between curses. You will not see this man again. You are like a child who has not developed a temperament for secrets. You are lucky we have a husband who believes he is more than all women and most men. If you were more discerning, more like a woman, say, he would have seen through your madness. And anyway, any wife is coming, so brace yourself. I just hope she has some sense in her head." She left the room dangling her Folake by the arm. I heard her yell Shaggy's name and instruct her to scrub the child thoroughly in the backyard, where the dirty water would be absorbed into the ground. I sat there, quietly, and watched Mutun twitching in her sleep. She was 6 days old. Her mouth had abandoned my breast. She looked so small and so unloved. A deep, damning shame came over me. I could not believe that I had neglected the children who brought me the easy life I lived. There and then, I decided to become a good mother to my children. I would be a liar if I said I wasn't tempted to visit my maid seller. I was. The yearning was hard to bear, but each time the urge came, I beat my bottom lip and rocked myself to sleep with a pillow between my legs. The body quickly remembers how to die in the face of pain. I cast all sweetness from my mind and drew my children close to fill its space. Yashagi was right. A new wife arrived. She was tall and lean, yet you could see that she had whipped her life onto the road of her choice. She had great strength in her forearms. She did everything with determination. Iya Shegi spoke sourly of me and referred to me as Akpoda, the stupid, slothful one, behind my back. Tope, my daughter, told me so. It would not surprise me if they were plotting to throw me and my daughters into a well. Iya Femi, the new wife, soon gave birth to a son, and there was much celebration. The new mother clapped her knees together when she sat and strutted about like her womb was a gold mine. That was to be expected, but it was Baba Shegi's words that made my ears ache. He spoke as if Femi were a draw, as if he were the first child to be born to the family. A daughter can never be like a son, he said. Only a son can become a true heir. Iya Shegi promptly reminded him that he already had an heir in Akin, our own son. My daughters were born with eyes in their stomachs, so they are quick to digest all that they see. They cling to each other for comfort and move together like a single wave. When one cries, the others cry too. And when one laughs, the others smile before asking what is amusing. Sometimes I feel like I am one of them. We look after one another and I've taught them all I know. Do not commit adultery, I tell them. Follow the path that is good and right, I say. And when they forget to do their homework, I ask them if they want to be educated ladies or useless tubers with arms and legs. They giggle when I say this. One day, I had a thought and shared it with them. I said it would probably be better for me to hang myself after they marry and leave home. They crumpled into the pile on the floor and wept. Mama, we would never leave you here, they cried. They understood so much more than I ever did. Like I said, they have eyes in their stomachs. Bonale does not deserve the treatment other wives give her. They bark at her as if she were a child. Don't sit there. Don't touch that. All day long they are at it. Yet she does as she is told and never complains. We both do as we are told. One of these days I should talk to her. I must think of words that I will say to her. Perhaps it is too early, and the other wives will call me a traitor. They would eat my flesh and the blood from their lips. I think I will watch her a little longer. If fate says we will speak to each other, then one day we will. I have a secret. I have started reading again. I do it when Baba Segi comes to lie with me. He doesn't like it. He keeps clasping my hands high above my head to stop me. But when he is in the throes of humping, I wriggle one arm out of his grip. I close my eyes and I scrape the soil. I push aside the leaves. I prod the stem and pinch the bud. My mind goes to the meat cellar, so I pull slowly, very slowly. Then quite unexpectedly, the plant is uprooted and pulsing at my fingers. I do not open my eyes. I don't want to see Baba Segi looking at me. That's the end of chapter 9. Wow. Wow. I think Iya Tope's story was quite intense. Please do leave a comment on the comment section of what you think. Till next time, this is the 3BN channel where books come alive.